Communism. We've all heard this word before, but do we actually know what it means? According to Google, it's a political theory derived from Karl Marx, advocating class war and linked to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. Okay, but what does this mean in a practical sense though? Well, to understand this, we first must understand the basics of some economic systems. There are two economic systems which are prevalent during this day and age, those being capitalism and socialism. Capitalism is basically where ownership of companies are private, and the people off the top profit off the work of the working class. And socialism is when the ownership is by the state, and everyone donates what they make for the betterment of the community. Now, most countries have a mixed economy, where they take the ideas of each system into account, but a very minute percentage of the entire world are either pure capitalist or pure socialist. A state only with capitalism, otherwise called anarchy, is one with the absence of government and having the individual being in full control. On the other hand, a pure socialist economy, otherwise known as communism, is one where the people control everything. Everything is publicly owned, and everyone works for the betterment of everybody. To sum this all up, capitalism is goods distributed over greeds, socialism is goods distributed over deeds, and communism is goods distributed over needs. But to truly understand what communism is, we need to go back in time to the birth of capitalism. Back in the 17th century, people lived in a much different world than we live in now. They ran their government through the feudal system, which is one where kings appoint leaders to run a part of the kingdom, and the leaders give taxes back to the king, while also maintaining order and running their part of the kingdom. But this was slowly starting to die out, because the Industrial Revolution was starting to gain traction, and people were getting sick of how mistreated they were by their feudal lords, and thus wanted a new system. A better one. However, what they got was objectively a lot worse. Due to capitalism, the proletariat, or the working class, were working 10, 11-hour days with no benefits, doing work that was repetitive and devoid of all meaning, making the proletariat feel like machines. It didn't matter what age or gender you were, you still had to work to support your family because of the meager salaries you obtained. And all this was done to benefit the bourgeoisie, or the capitalist class, who only sat there and exploited the proletariat class for their own benefits. All this sparked rebellion in the proletariat, which would lead to the French Revolution and many others, where they demanded more rights, better working conditions, and ensured that the bourgeoisie didn't have power. Now, the early revolutions were considered to be failures, because the bourgeoisie had too much power, and the proletariats didn't have enough people to stop them. Because of the corruption that was taking place, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels teamed up in 1848 to write what would be the most revolutionary book of all time, the Communist Manifesto. Although during Marx's lifetime, this book wasn't all that popular, after he passed, it gained a lot of traction, inspiring the working class and world leaders alike. Its ideology manifested itself in many governments, the most notable of them being the Soviet Union and China. Each of these countries made their own versions of communism to varying amounts of success, but we'll talk about them in the next video. The Communist Manifesto was, well, a manifesto of the Communist Party. This book wanted to make one thing clear, and that was, and I quote, "The existing of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle." This quote was so important to the argument that Karl Marx decided for this to be the very first sentence of the book. What this quote means is that throughout all of history, starting during the Neolithic era up until now, the problem is that the bourgeoisie holds all the power and exploits the proletariat for their own personal gain. Throughout history, these classes have gone by many different names, but it still never ceased to stop exploiting the working class. This hasn't been any more apparent with capitalism, as the proletariat work in inhumane conditions with meager wages and doing the same monotonous thing day by day, depriving any sense of pride they had in their work. Marx's solution to this was communism, or what we call it, Marxism. It's just basically is another word for communism, except it's the idealistic, or the quote-unquote perfect version of it. In this version, there would be a classless, moneyless, and stateless society, where everybody does what they can to contribute and takes what they need back. So basically, they do whatever profession they have, and give everything they accumulate from it back to the community, and everybody does that. They then take what they need back, whether it's food, clothes, tools. There would be no government or states to enforce this, and everybody would be equal, living a life of happiness and fulfillment with no stress whatsoever. With the rapid spread of industrialization, and becoming the easiest it's ever been to spread news across the globe, Karl Marx was sure a revolution was due to break out soon, defeating the bourgeoisie. And he was right. Countless revolutions over the world started to break out, with the more prominent of them being France, Russia, and China. Organizing a revolution a couple hundred years ago would have taken centuries, but now thanks to industrialization, it only takes mere years. The leaders of these nations were influenced by Karl Marx's work and decided to incorporate it into their political ideology, but each with a twist of their own. That's why we got Leninism, Stalinism, Trotskyism, and Maoism, but none of these were a true communistic society. The truth is that Marxism is simply a dream, a concept. It all amounts to nothing more than just a dream. It would be impossible to have a truly communistic society because of a multitude of reasons. Firstly, the government. In the lead up to a truly communistic society, the government has to have the people's interest in their priority. But this simply wasn't the case with many leaders, as they used corruption and abused their power instead of helping their country. Secondly, because of human nature, we're naturally inclined to want more. Because of our greed and power hunger, if we ever did have a truly communistic society, then a couple individuals will take advantage of this and get more from themselves, making a new upper class where it'll take the place of the bourgeoisie, and everything will return to how it once was. All in all, communism is a good idea on paper, but not in practice. Some people say that Marx was a madman, and I frankly can't disagree more. Marx was right about capitalism, but his ideas were a little too extreme. In an ideal world, then this would have worked perfectly, but unfortunately it isn't, and we all have impulses of greed and power. During the current climate we're living in right now, the best economic structure would be a combination of capitalism and socialism. The companies would be privately owned and benefit off their workers, but this time the workers would be given benefits and better treatments, and everybody would give whatever they can afford to the government so they can provide us with services such as healthcare, public works projects, and emergency services for the betterment of everyone's life, similar to communism. And even though Marx's views on communism were never fully achieved, his radical ideas inspired millions of proletariat and government leaders, and that is truly revolutionary.